fight day, everyone. Welcome to the Monkey Knife Fight UFC 265 picks. Myself and Greg will be here for the next 30 minutes talking about today's Monkey Knife Fight slate. Of course, you got to check out Monkey Knife Fight. You heard us talk about it on the Strategy Show every week, live before lock. Of course, they've got that great promo going on for an instant first match deposit. When you use that promo code Awesemo, instant first match deposit of up to $100. Of course, they got their Knockout Kings contest that you can play today to be eligible for a $5,000 prize pool. All you got to do is pick 3 fighters to win by TKO or KO. We'll talk about that. You can get more information over at monkeyknifefight.com. Greg, great to be doing a show with you. It's been a while, man.
Yeah, and I haven't talked MMA for a little bit. I was doing articles for us. I did MMA articles for a little bit. Then also I was doing DraftKings MMA shows for a little bit. But I've been so bottled down into doing, so much NBA, MLB content that I haven't really had the opportunity to do much MMA. But now we've got this Monkey Knife Fight deal and we're doing shows for them. It's something else we need to do shows for. And by the way, also, guys, even if you don't play on Monkey Knife Fight or maybe you're unsure, stick around anyway, because some of this information is going to be applicable to other sites also. If there's somebody who we think has a good chance to finish a fight, or there's somebody we think has a good chance to win a fight by a decision that has pretty significant output, all this stuff, it's going to be applicable to other sites as well.
If you listen to me and Pete every Thursday on the Strategy Show, when we talk about Monkey Knife Fight, one of the things I always say is, if you like a line on Thursday, you got to hop on it immediately, because these lines can change throughout the week. A couple of fights, we did see some changes. We saw in the main event with Derek Lewis back on Thursday, his total strikes landed number was 35.5. That is now up to 42.5. And we can get right into the main event here of Derek Lewis and Ciryl Gane. When you look at the total strikes numbers here, 95.5 is the number for Ciryl Gane. In terms of fantasy points, 108.5 for Gane, and for Derek Lewis, 58.5. And I mean, look, Greg, it's not difficult to break this matchup down. I mean, Derek Lewis is not a volume puncher, first off. And yesterday, as he said during the stare down, all it takes is one time. But that's the thing. And Ciryl Gane is the type of fighter that he's going to sit back and be patient. But here's what my concern with Ciryl Gane is being able to have this patient fighting style with no fans in attendance. Now you're in Derek Lewis's backyard. I mean, look, the 42.5 number for Derek Lewis, I still man, I don't know if I want to go more on that one, but also I don't know if I want to go more on Ciryl Gane. I mean, I think it's more likely Ciryl Gane goes over 95.5 than Derek Lewis goes over 42.5.
Yeah. So here's the other thing also is basically every heavyweight fight we're ever breaking down, for the most part, we're expecting it to be a finish, especially for Derek Lewis fights at some point. But on the other side, a lot of Ciryl Gane's fights have been fairly low paced and have gone to decision. And the other thing also with Derek Lewis, first of all, if anybody's looking at the numbers, and if you go to UFCstats.com, used to be Fight Metric, they do all the official stat keeping. If you look at the stats there, they're listing significant strikes. But if you click on the fighters' pages individually in the fights, you could also see their total strikes landed, which is what Monkey Knife Fight uses. But Derek Lewis only lands significant strikes. There are no insignificant strikes that Derek Lewis is landing. When do you think is the last time that Derek Lewis landed 40 or more significant strikes in a fight?
Was it the Abdul Rahimov fight? Was to the 4th round?
Let's see. It was the fight against Mark Hunt, which he lost in the 4th round, and that was in June of 2017. It's talking about 4 years since he's landed 40 significant strikes, or 40 strikes at all in a fight. Even his recent wins against Curtis Blades, a 2nd-round knockout, he lands 7 strikes in a fight that finishes midway through the 2nd round. The fight against Lindquist, he knocks him out in the 2nd round. He ends up landing 35 strikes in that fight. The fight against Ilir Latifi, I personally thought he lost. He ends up winning a unanimous decision. I thought that Latifi should have won, but neither one of them did anything. Derek Lewis landed 20 strikes. Latifi landed 5, but Latifi landed some takedowns and held top position, was able to grind out a victory. I mean, what I thought should have been a victory. But listen, Derek Lewis is such a low output fighter. And I think that generally we're going to look at this as Ciryl Gane picks him apart from distance, potentially finishes the fight, or Derek Lewis lands that 1 strike. But to me, I feel, of the numbers we have here, I feel most confident in the less than 42.5 for Derek Lewis. And I think Ciryl Gane's probably a little liver for a finish than most people realize, especially if Derek Lewis is going to get reckless and try to charge forward, because as a total fighter, I think Gane is much better. And I think there's a little bit of a sneaky chance from the wrestle a little bit here.
Well, that's where I think we're going to see Ciryl Gane potentially go the takedown route. And that's why on Thursday strategy show, I mentioned about the prop bet of Ciryl Gane to win via submission. I do think that is a live prop. It's plus 600 for people who have seen that. I mean, look, Derek Lewis, he's got that one punch power. And I'll tell you, on Monkey Knife Fight, I pretty much just play the total strikes. That's what I like to. I like to try those, find those advantages. But I just. It's tough to go more on Derek Lewis at 42.5. It's just tough because you just know that he's going to be sitting back, and I could see this being a matchup where we don't see a ton of strikes landed in the first round because both guys are coming out with in a very cautious mindset. And I mean, look, I don't think the stat means anything. Someone asked me about it earlier in our Slack channel. Derek Lewis is 5-0 in Houston. 2 of those wins have come in the UFC, but obviously this is a much different beast in taking on Ciryl Gane as opposed to Victor Pesta and Lear Latifi.
Yeah, and the other thing too is, I mean, Derek Lewis has a 44% takedown defense. I think that Ciryl Gane, we haven't seen him have to wrestle a lot in his recent fights, but I think it's not out of the question here. And like you said, I do think a submission is live here. So of the numbers here, it's hard for me to really buy into getting more than 96.5 or 95.5 for Gane, even though I think that he lands at a much higher rate than Derek Lewis. If this goes to decision, he probably lands over. But just because I do think he's live to end up finishing the fight in the second or third round, that would make it pretty hard for him to top 95.5. So 42.5, the less than there for Derek Lewis. That's what I feel best about.
Yeah, it feels like everyone I've heard this week, the under 4.5 rounds prop is the prop that everyone's looking at in terms of this fight. Let's move over to the co-main event. Jose Aldo, Pedro Munhoz. This is one of those lines. When I saw it earlier this week, I was actually surprised on the Pedro Munhoz line at 94.5. The Jose Aldo one seemed kind of where I would expect it to be at 62.5. This is a fight that I do expect to play out on the feet. In terms of our traditional DFS sites, I don't love this fight in terms of daily fantasy just because the way I see it playing out, I don't see either one of these guys going the takedown route. So I think this is a fight that's going to play on the feed. I do think that there's a high probability this fight's going to go 15 minutes. The 94.5 is a big number for me on Pedro Munhoz. Like, I would more lean to going less Pedro Munhoz. And for Jose Aldo, 62.5. And I'd rather go more than go less in that situation because I got to think about leg kicks.
Yeah, it's the one thing that kind of trips me up about all of those. He's just such a low output fighter. So even his last fight, which was a 3-round decision win over Marlon Vera that he looked pretty good in, he lands 44 significant strikes, 60s total strikes in that fight. Against Jan, that was a fight where he ended up getting finished in the 5th round. He ends up landing 83 strikes, 83 significant strikes as well. The output for him is just so low that it's really hard for me to think that he's going to be able to top this number, even in a decision reliably. And I think there's a chance that he could get finished in the 2nd or 3rd round by Pedro Munhoz. I think on paper, at least the way I break down fights, I think this is a very favorable matchup for Munhoz just based on output, because although at this point in his career, he's so hesitant to throw strikes, and we just haven't seen that much output from him. The fight against Marlon Moraes, and Marlon Moraes also another guy who does not throw very many strikes. A lot of people thought that Aldo won that fight. He ended up losing by decision. But in that one also, Aldo lands 58 significant strikes, 63 total strikes. That was a fight that went 3 rounds. I don't feel great about either of these numbers here. I agree that I'd probably lean a little bit towards the Aldo over just because I think that Munhoz could force the volume out of Jose Aldo, because Munhoz is such a high pressure fighter. And if you look at the significant strike numbers, he lands at such a higher rate than Jose Aldo, that if Aldo wasn't throwing to keep up with Munhoz, because Munhoz lands 5.6 significant strikes per minute, Jose Aldo lands 3.45. So Munhoz, his output is almost double what Aldo's is. So I kind of think this is a case where we look at some of Munhoz's numbers and it probably regresses a little bit to be closer to Aldo's. Aldo maybe comes up a little bit to be closer to Munhoz, but this is a fight that I definitely favor Munhoz in, just based on the numbers and the data that I look at to break down fights. And Munhoz, we've also seen fight very high level competition lately. So I'm going to lean a little bit towards the over on Jose Aldo, but not a super confident one. And Munhoz one, I think, is about a fair number.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think in terms of, as I look at our entire slate today over at Monkey Knife Fight, The co-main event is not a fight that I would say, hey, we need a target. I think there's other fights that are just better options to target in terms of this one. And look, Jose Aldo is a slight favorite in this one, -120, +100 for Pedro Munhoz. I mean, look, this is a card where we've got several pick'em fights throughout the card. We'll talk about some of those fights here as we go on. But yeah, it's just one of those fights that I would not say I'm targeting, but it's for Munhoz. It's just at 94.5 now. If he does get the fight to the ground and maybe you can land a bunch of strikes on the mat, that I think changed the formula a little bit as well. Of course, so we're here for the next 20 minutes talking monkey knife fight. And then at the top of the hour, Pete Rogers Jr. will join me for Live Before Lock as we'll break down everything else in terms of this matchup. Let's move over to the matchup that honestly is the fight that I'm interested in the most, and Michael Chiesa and Vicente Luque. It's not a hard fight for me to break down, Greg. This was pretty easy. If the fight plays out on the feet, this is Vicente Luque all day. However, if this fight goes to the ground, to me, it's Michael Chiesa. And as I look at the total strikes landed in this one, 56.5 for Vicente Luque, 76.5 for Vicente Luque, 56.5 for Michael Chiesa. I think it just comes down to, how do you think this fight is going to play out? If you think this fight is going to play out, I would much rather go more 56.5 on Chiesa, less 76.5 on Vicente Luque. However, if you think Luque can keep this fight on the feet, I think it's vice versa.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think this is pretty close to a coin flip of a fight. I think one thing we could both agree on, though, it's probably not going to be competitive, right? Like, depending on how it goes, yeah, I agree with you on that one. Yeah. So I'm not saying that I know which of them is going to win, but either Chiesa, I expect, is going to be able to land takedowns, is going to be able to hold top control, advanced position, potentially submit Vicente Luque, although I think he's probably more likely to grind out a decision, but would still probably score pretty well for fantasy purposes just because it would be grappling based. Whereas Vicente Luque, on the other side, if he's able to stuff takedowns, I just think he's going to put on a ton of volume on Chiesa and probably end up finishing him on the feet. So I don't think this fight is going to be competitive. Based on whatever your lean is, I think you explained it properly. From just a monkey knife fight perspective, if you have a lean on either side, you go more on Vicente Luque, less than Michael Chiesa, and then vice versa, whichever side you pick. I personally don't have a really strong lean. I could say for just normal DFS purposes, for other sites, I'm going to be higher on Michael Chiesa just because of price-based reasons. But for monkey knife fight, I think this is a really good one to be able to, find the correlation between these guys and pick the more on the one who wins, the less on the other. Because I don't think this fight's going to be competitive. It's going to be pretty one-sided.
Well, look, this is outside of the main event, is probably my most exposed fight in terms of tonight's slate, just because of how I see it kind of breaking down. Where, I mean, look, the thing with Chiesa is he has a submission ability, but he's not this super active guy when the fight hits the mat. So it's not like, you think of Khabib. When Khabib would take the fight to the ground, it was just super active, laying a ton of punches. And I mean, we can name various wrestlers that do that. That's just not really Chiesa's game. He's going to control a lot. I mean, but look, the thing is, Luque does have a good grappling base. Gilbert Burns is one of his main training partners, and everyone knows how good Gilbert Burns' BJJ is. But I mean, look, I think it just comes down to is, how do you see the fight going? I prefer Chiesa in the matchup, so that's why I'd be looking at definitely less on Vicente Luque at 76.5, and 56.5. I would probably say more, just because I think if Chiesa wins, it's a 15-minute decision. But I do agree with you. If Vicente Luque wins, and he's battering up Michael Chiesa, I think we potentially have a stoppage there, and that's why I would go the way I'm looking at it.
Yeah, and then also, I mean, to your point about Michael Chiesa, who, number one, is not a good striker whatsoever. And if you look at his significant strike numbers, and one thing that's also really key about Monkey Knife Fight is to keep in mind that they're looking at strike totals and not significant strike totals, because Michael Chiesa in his last 4 fights, 5-round decision against Neil Magny, lands 24 significant strikes, but 93 total strikes. Against Rafael Dos Anjos, that was a 3-round decision. He lands 9 significant strikes, but 54 total strikes. So there's always going to be a pretty big gap in between his significant strikes and total strikes, because just the way it's scored, he gets a lot of top position. He lands kind of like light hammer fists that used to be terrible for fantasy purposes, but now with a little bit of change in scoring for DraftKings, it's different. And on Monkey Knife Fight, also counting strikes, not significant strikes.
Yeah, I will tell you this in terms of that knockout contest we have over Monkey Knife Fight. I think Vicente Luque is someone to consider when you're talking about who to put in your pool of who you want to consider. Luque is one of them, but I will tell you this: when it comes to this main card, I do think outside of the Chiesa Luque and the Lewis Gane fight, I think we got a high probability that the other fights are all going to go 15 minutes. So we'll move on to that female matchup of Tisha Torres and Angela Hill. I wouldn't say that these are they're not besties. That's definitely clear between these two girls, but huge number on Tisha Torres here, 114.5. 86.5 on Angela Hill, which I think potentially is a large number for Angela Hill. And I think it's kind of what we were just talking about the last fight. It's how do you see it going? If you believe Tisha Torres is going to utilize a wrestling game in this one, which is definitely the weakness of Angela Hill, then I think that 114.5, first off, then you need to go 15 minutes and you need her to be super volume heavy on the ground. So to me, I prefer to go to less on that side. The Angela Hill side is 86, she's a volume puncher. And when she is landing in a 15-minute fight, she can easily hit that 86.5 number. I don't know if she hits it in this spot.
Yeah. And by the way, also, we've seen these two fight before. It was a very long time ago, and I think both of them are better now, especially Angela Hill. But Tisha Torres won a decision over Angela Hill in 2015, actually. And in that fight, Tisha Torres ended up landing 86 total strikes, 66 total strikes for Angela Hill. One thing that I think is key here is depending how much Tisha Torres is going to shoot for takedowns and try to control position, there could be a chance that this is just not nearly the same output of volume that we normally see from an Angela Hill fight. And this is priced on Monkey Knife Fight as if it's going to be a stand-up fight where there's just a ton of volume on both sides. So I actually like taking the less than strikes for both of them, and because I like the correlation there. I think that basically what you're taking a play on is that Tisha Torres is going to shoot for takedowns, because 114.5 for 86.5 for Angela Hill, those are both really significant numbers that would need to be a high volume decision that plays out on the feet for both of them to hit them more than. And while that's possible, I don't think that's the most likely outcome. I think given how Tisha Torres was able to earn top control in the first fight, was able to take down Angela Hill for a couple of times, if she approaches with a similar game plan, both of them were so under these strike totals the first time they met.
Look, if her game plan is not to try to utilize her wrestling, she really needs to look at coaches at a better game plan. I mean, plain and simple. I mean, everyone knows with Angela Hill what you want to do. You don't want to sit there and have a volume striking matchup. And, one of the things to point to with Angela Hill, you go back to that matchup against Claudia Gadelha, 2-3 years ago, however long it's been at this point, where Claudia had success in the first round, but she had the gas tank wavered. And then the second and third round, Angela Hill was able to stop. So I think that is something to kind of think of in terms of that matchup. Now, our first fight of the night is going to be Song Yadong versus Casey Kenney. And when you look at the total strikes number in this one, Song Yadong 96.5, Casey Kenney at 76.5. I was kind of surprised that maybe this wasn't vice versa. In all reality, when I spoke to Casey Kenney last week,
I think it is vice versa.
Is it vice versa? Yeah. I had it wrong on my sheet here. 96.5 for Casey Kenney. Casey Kenney basically laid it out to me of, I need to be a complete mixed martial artist, which I translate that in as I actually need to use my background in wrestling. Everyone's seen Casey Kenney in UFC. They've seen him as a striker, but he does have a wrestling background. So I think that's something you have to consider going into this one at 96.5, even if it plays out. And Casey Kenney has been a volume striker. If you look in, his fight against Dom Cruz, he's approaching that number as well. I mean, if you want to go more, I mean, I think your theory's got to be is he's got to get to 100 strikes in 15 minutes.
Which we've seen him do before. I mean, the fight against Dominic Cruz, first of all, Dominic Cruz is one of the most difficult people to land hands on in the entire division. And still, we saw Casey Kenney land 74 significant strikes in that fight. He landed also 74 total strikes. Then you go back to his previous matchups against Nathaniel Wood. That was a war that ended up winning fight of the night. He lands 123 significant strikes in that fight. The fight against Haley Alaton, which was not competitive whatsoever. I don't know how Alaton was able to stay standing and didn't get knocked down in that fight, but Casey Kenney lands 109 significant strikes in that fight. In terms of total strikes, that was also 109. Casey Kenney, the volume's there. I'm lower on Song Yadong, I think, than the general public, and then what a lot of the books are kind of based on how this fight is being priced. And I think Yadong is a very solid fighter for one round, but we've seen him get tired in some previous fights. Like, he had not that much left towards the later rounds against Kyler Phillips last time out. And Kyler Phillips, we just saw gas pretty hard, was 2 weeks ago at this point in one of his fights. The fight against Marlon Vera, personally, I thought Yadong lost that fight. Fight against Cody Stamann, Yadong also looked tired towards the end of that fight. So just given the kind of pressure that we've seen Casey Kenney apply and the kind of output that he puts out, I don't think that's something Yadong is able to keep up with. So I favor Casey Kenney pretty solidly in this fight.
Of course, you're watching our Monkey Knife Fight show. If you have not signed up for Monkey Knife Fight yet, and you do that today, be sure to use that promo code Awesemo for an instant first match deposit of up to $100. Look, it's a big number on Casey Kenney, but I think he can very much hit that number because I do think this is a fight that goes 15 minutes. I lean going more on Casey Kenney, less on Song Yadong. Now, when I look at the preliminary card, and I touched on this Thursday on the Strategy Show, is I think preliminary card is a part of the card to really target in terms of Monkey Knife Fight and other DFS sites. Now, when I look at the Monkey Knife Fight in terms of that knockout challenge that we talked about at the beginning of the show, there's a couple fights that I'm looking at targeting. Vince Morales, Draco Rodriguez is one of them. Alonzo Menifield, Ed Herman is another one. Miles Johns, Anderson Dos Santos is another one. I can see the case of putting the Johnny Munoz, Jamie Simmons matchup in there, but I kind of do lean. I think that Johnny Munoz probably wins by submission in that one. The Menifield Herman fight. I mean, look, we all know what Alonzo Menifield is. If Alonzo Menifield is winning, he is winning by knockout, most likely within the first 5 minutes, because can't trust his gas tank.
No, and this is a fight that I actually think if Ed Herman fights him 5 years ago, maybe I would actually favor Herman pretty handily in this fight. But Ed Herman's 40 years old now, and his last fight against Mike Rodriguez, a fight where he should have been finished up against the cage. I think it was in the second round, and there was a timeout called for, forget who the referee was, but he was on a really bad stretch. Remember, whoever it was, he had a stretch where it was like 3 weeks in a row where he was involved in questionable decisions. But
you're talking about the great Chris Tione?
Yeah, Chris Tione had a really bad stretch where I can't remember what the other fights were. But
and it was always like the first fight of the night too.
So that was the Mike Rodriguez Ed Herman fight where Mike Rodriguez very clearly lands a body kick that folds Ed Herman, and Chris Tione thought there was a low blow, goes to the replay review. They end up deciding like, okay, it was illegal. It was a legal strike. They carry on the fight. Ed Herman ends up coming back to win, but he was totally finished at the point in time that strike got landed. The point being is that even though Ed Herman is on a 3-fight winning streak, he should have been finished in his last fight. He's also 40 years old, and Alonzo Menifield has tremendous finishing ability. Alonzo Menifield also has like 3 minutes of cardio in him. I mean, Alonzo Menifield gassed out against Ovince St. Preux, and Ovince St. Preux doesn't have more than 5 minutes of cardio either. So if Alonzo Menifield does not win this fight by KO in the first round, I think he probably ends up losing a decision. So in terms of the knockout prop, I do think that he's one of the most likely fighters to win by finish, because the most likely outcome in this fight is probably a first round knockout for Menifield. I'd probably say that happens like 60% of the time. And then probably 40% of the time is Ed Herman ends up winning by decision.
Yeah, I mean, even if Alonzo Menifield wins by knockout in the first round, I don't know if he hits 47.5 strikes, because it may be probably underneath 20. So I would be looking, if your thought process is that Alonzo Menifield is going to win this thing early, I'd almost be looking double less. But if you think Ed Herman can survive, then that becomes kind of an interesting scenario. The best Ed Herman story, I don't know if you heard this one about his last fight. So he gets pulled on fight day, and then another fight got pulled that same day. And they call Ed Herman to go, hey, man, we got a fight for you. You can fight about an hour. He goes, sorry, man, I'm already drinking tequila at the bar.
Yeah, I do. Actually, I think I knew that because it was something you'd retweeted, if I remember correctly. But yeah, I do remember that. But yeah, still, this is a fight that another one, kind of like the Chiesa Luque fight, where I also think both sides correlate pretty heavily, because if Menifield wins, I actually expect both of them to go less than. And then if Ed Herman ends up winning, I think that he's probably going to hit the more than. Actually, I think Benefield actually is probably fairly likely to hit the less than in a win or a loss in this fight, just because he could finish by KO really quickly, or he could just gas out and then get controlled by Ed Herman. So I'll say the less than for Benefield is what I feel best about.
I would say another fight that I'm actually kind of targeting over on Monkey Knife Fight is the female matchup between Carolina Kowalkiewicz and Jessica Penne. If Jessica Penne wins this one, to me, it's about her making this a grinding takedown against the fence, clinch type fight, where if Kowalkiewicz gets the win here, it's going to be her keeping this thing at range. The one thing we have seen is Jessica Penne is very hittable. You think about, I'll never forget as Joanna and Jacek literally batter her up until finally they just said enough is enough. But to me, if you like Penne in this fight, which I do like going more 65.5 on her, less on 86.5 on Carolina Kowalkiewicz. But I mean, look, if you think that this is a fight where Kowalkiewicz can keep it at range, 86.5 is a big number, but I can see her hitting it.
Yeah, and the other thing, too, is that Kowalkiewicz just throws with so much volume. So last fight, she was controlled for a lot of it by Yan Jianan. So she ends up only landing 38 significant strikes, 51 total strikes. But then even a fairly lopsided decision against Alexa Grasso, Kowalkiewicz fought until the end. She ends up landing 90 significant strikes, 92 total strikes. Just given that this fight is very, very likely to go the distance, I actually like the more than for both of them. I agree with you. I feel a little bit better about Jessica Penne, who, even though she isn't a high volume striker at all, we saw even in her last fight where she controlled it up against the octagon for almost the entire time. She didn't land any takedown, or maybe one takedown in that fight, but she still landed close to 100 total strikes just based on, like knees and stuff like that up against the cage. So just the fact that we're scoring this on total strikes and not significant strikes, that I think is more favorable towards Penne.
I mentioned about Vince Morales and Draco Martinez as potentially a fight to target in terms of that knockout challenge they have over at Monkey Knife Fight. Of course, head over to monkeyknifefight.com to get into that contest there. I mean, look, I think someone's getting stopped in that fight. Both of them are coming in off long layoffs. Now, the one thing that does concern me about Vince Morales is, and we have seen fighters attack his legs. While he may be the cousin of Ricky Simon, and Ricky Simon has a great wrestling game, that's not Vince Morales. But that, in terms of that knockout contest, I think that is a fight that you do have to, you got to target. And I do prefer getting to the Vince Morales side in that one.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing, too, you have to consider is that Draco Rodriguez was finished by Faraz Sahabi's younger brother last time out, who I didn't think was ever going to win another UFC fight or even be competitive. And then just the fact that we saw him get finished, and by the way, not even by a shot that looked all that hard by the eyes. It's not like he got hit crazy flush by anything. And he didn't just go out, like he went out. So I have a lot of concerns about Draco Rodriguez's chin, because I mean, that fight against Ayman Zahabi landed 9 strikes and one of them put him out. And once again, like I said, it wasn't a strike that just kind of put him down. The ref stopped. Like, he went out from that strike. And then Vince Morales, we also saw him get finished, like you said, by leg kicks by Chris Gutierrez his last time out. So I have durability issues about both sides of this fight. I don't think there's going to be any grappling involved. So it's a fight that if you look at sports books, it's, like 50-50 to finish inside the distance. So I tend to agree with you. I think that I side towards Morales just because I don't know that we've seen Draco Rodriguez throw the same kind of leg kicks that we saw Vince Morales get finished with last time out. So slightly lean towards Morales for the Knockout Kings, and then more than 69.5 strikes for him as well.
Yeah, you got to check out that Knockout Kings contest over at Monkey Knife Fight. Pick 3 fighters to win by knockout or technical knockout. Terms and conditions do apply. Go over to monkeyknifefight.com to check that out, of course. Sign up today over at Monkey Knife Fight. Use that promo code Awesemo for an instant first match deposit of up to $100. Of course, coming up in 30 minutes from now, we got Live Before Lock with myself and Pete Rogers Jr., and Greg will be on after us for MLB Live Before Lock. I haven't played a lot of MLB this year, but used all of our tools we have over at Awesemo.com and had a nice little win last night. So I'm happy with that. So what should we expect on MLB Live Before Lock here today, Greg?
By the way, I was just looking at our schedule today. I hope people like you and I, because the entire schedule is just us alternating shows. Like you did, it's you doing NASCAR, you doing MMA, you doing another MMA. I've done MMA. I've got 2 MLB shows today. But yeah, just normal MLB Live Before Lock show, breaking down all the games tonight, and it's a pretty big slate today. So there was an early slate. There's going to be another slate. So yeah, people come in, ask questions, we hang out, all the usual good stuff.
And of course, I'll be back in 30 minutes for Live Before Lock. That is going to do it for the Monkey Knife Fight UFC 265 show. I will talk to you in 30 minutes for Live Before Lock. Talk to you here shortly as we'll get you ready for tonight's UFC 265.